Seriously Balkans, the BiEPAG Talks, your in-depth analysis and discussion of current events in the Western Balkans.
On 2nd of June 2024, Serbia held planned local elections which were paired with snap elections in Belgrade. The snap election in the capital was called because of gross irregularities that marred elections held in December 2023. At this previous election, the opposition in Belgrade came very close to taking power, and it had really hoped to make a comeback this time. If anything, however, the result in Belgrade was even worse in June this year. This is partially due to a division in the opposition, which split into two camps. Some argued that due to the continued irregularities, a boycott was necessary, whereas others wanted to participate anyway. Be it as it is, the split impacted the turnout, which was significantly lower than the previous election. However, other local realities went differently, and the opposition was able to score good success in a few other places. Lessons learned might be applied at national level. We discussed this and other issues with two experts who've been following the situation on the ground. I am Tena, your host for this episode, and this is Seriously Balkans.
Seriously Balkans, the BiEPAG Talks.
I am joined today by Tamara Brankovic, who's the Deputy Program Director at Serbian NGO CRTA, and also the Deputy Head of CRTA Election Observation Mission, as well as by Aleksandar Ivkovic, who's a journalist with the European Western Balkans and also plays a leading role in their Serbia Elects project. Aleksandar, let's start with you. Could you give us a bit of a background? What are the overall results of these repeat elections, and what are the implications for Serbian politics at large?
The results can be described as a dominant victory of the coalition around the ruling Serbian Progressive Party, which won almost every contest in the local elections that took place on the 2nd of June, with the exception of several municipalities. However, their victory is almost comprehensive. These were regular local elections and snap elections in the city of Belgrade, the capital of Serbia. Elections in Belgrade were already held in December last year, together with the parliamentary elections, and they resulted in a hung local parliament in which neither side had a majority. And these elections produced a serious political crisis, with opposition claiming that the elections were stolen, that there was election fraud, and that the result was tempered by the ruling party through multiple means, including illegal registration of citizens who do not actually live in Belgrade to vote in the local elections and support the ruling party.
So Aleksandar mentioned these electoral conditions, which were kind of this important reason why the elections were repeated and that keep being discussed again and again. Tamara, your organization has been at the forefront of advocating for better electoral conditions. Have they improved?
Well, it is really discouraging when describing the situation with elections in Serbia when we see that we had another round of elections with zero impunity cases, with corrupted voter registry, with mechanisms of pressures against voters that are happening on a daily basis being even normalized. When we put a context like this, we can't say that the election conditions improved. Actually, these elections took place under the same conditions as the previous elections. And our assessment in general of what happened yesterday at the polls in Belgrade, but also what was happening throughout the campaigning for the Belgrade elections, is that we again witnessed an environment where we can clearly say that there are no democratic standards for free and fair elections in Serbia.
So clearly highly unfair electoral conditions still, a situation in which the media scene is also very heavily inclined towards the incumbents. Well, overall also a difficult situation in the opposition. And yet, Aleksandar, we see that the results in certain cities are not as bad, as grim for the opposition as they were in Belgrade. So, for instance, we saw a success of the opposition in the city of Niš in the southern Serbia. Can you break down a little bit for us the difference in these outcomes? And what do you think actually led to a different outcome in cities like, Belgrade, Novi Sad on one hand, and in Niš or in other certain parts of Belgrade on the other, where the opposition managed to prevail despite everything?
Certainly. So the first thing I would like to mention is that for these elections, the ruling party, Serbian Progressive Party, created this massive ruling coalition, which included the Serbian Socialist Party of Serbia, so the junior coalition partner. For the first time, Serbian Progressive Party and the Socialist Party of Serbia were running on the same list, because in Serbia, in local elections, there are no direct elections for mayors. There are only elections for local parliaments, and they are based on the closed list proportional system. So in order to ensure its victory, the ruling coalition widened in this electoral cycle and included, I think, 12 political parties in total. And this partially explains their dominant victories in places such as Belgrade and Novi Sad. In Niš, which you mentioned, even this wasn't enough for several reasons. The first reason is that the local administration run by the Serbian Progressive Party was highly internally divided and highly unpopular among the local population. And the second factor is the presence of the movement led by Dr. Dragan Milic, a local cardiologist who gained a lot of prominence in recent years, especially during the COVID pandemic and the crisis of the healthcare system that resulted from the pandemic. He won almost a quarter of the vote in Niš without any serious infrastructure, which can be explained by the fact, as I said, that he is a popular local figure and by the fact that he is not seen as a quote-unquote regular politician. So there is a certain populist element to his success. But nevertheless, with his movement, he managed to win over some who voted for the ruling party in the past, which the opposition in Belgrade and Novi Sad did not manage to do. And this led to a city parliament, which, as we speak, the results are still being determined. It seems that this massive ruling coalition and 4 opposition lists have won the same number of seats, so 30-30. And there is one seat which was won by the minority Russian party, who is now a kingmaker in the city of Niš. And it seems that probably it will choose Serbian Progressive Party and make a minimal ruling majority with them, which means that opposition may not take over the city of Niš, but their success is still significant.
So about this success, 2 questions actually. So the first one is, do you think that this success of Dr. Milic on local level can be replicated in some way at a national level by him or by others? And how would that happen? And the second one, who do you think is the official or unofficial leader of the Serbian opposition today? Because I saw that jokingly some commentators were referring to Dr. Milic now as the leader of the opposition, because he's actually the one that managed to have best success at these elections out of all the various opposition groups. It seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's actually playing into Vučić's hands that we can't point at one opposition leader.
I think that Dr. Milic can only be referred now as the leader of the opposition in the city of Niš, but not in Serbia. His success must be replicated at the national level in order for the opposition to win someday. And I think the main ingredient is that the opposition needs to produce a candidate or a political force which will be able to win over some of the voters from the ruling coalition. I mean, it's nothing too original, but it's something that opposition has not been able to do for more than a decade, also due to the unfair electoral conditions, which we were speaking about, but also it needs a change of approach. It is true that there are too many parties in the opposition, that the opposition is too fragmented, that this was once again evident in these elections when the entire ruling coalition was able to submit a single list in most of the municipalities, and opposition submitted between 3 and 6 lists on average, I think, in most of the municipalities. I don't think that we will ever going to get a single leader of the opposition in Serbia because the ideological differences between the opposition parties are too large. But we can get small number of strong challengers to Vučić's government, which would then be able to cooperate and potentially change power. In the Belgrade election, the most successful opposition list was submitted by Go Change movement in Serbian Kreni Promeni, which was an environmental activist group that gained the most prominence during the protests in 2021 against the lithium mining project in Serbia. And these were huge protests that actually forced the government to pause this project, not to cancel it completely, but pause it. And it was just a matter of time when this activist group led by Savo Manojlović would enter politics. He did so now, and they won about 18% of the vote in Belgrade, which was a strong debut for a single organization. So it was not a coalition, it's just one organization. So they certainly have some political future, and Savo Manojlović could be one of the opposition leaders in Serbia. But as I said, I don't expect that there will ever be a single counterpart to Vučić or a figure that is as dominant as he is.
Let's go back to Tamara. Tamara, you've been observing also a lot of the electoral fraud that has been happening throughout the years in elections in Serbia. What happened this time? Was it possible to reduce the amount of fraud? What are still the weak areas?
The election day that we saw yesterday was marred with severe irregularities. Basically, the integrity of the entire election day went under severe breaches of the rules at 9% of the polling stations in Belgrade. And at these polling stations, we say that the results cannot be established. They do not actually reflect the will of the people who vote there. Although these amount of polling stations is not influential and does not change the results for the Belgrade elections as such, meaning the results for the winner would not be changed if the voters voted otherwise. Basically, the level of the control, mechanisms of the control that were employed during the entire election day, combined with the fact that we don't have integrity of the voter registry, which should be the basic instrument and the fundamental instrument for determining the will of the people, determining the will of the voters at the elections. There were no basically conditions for free and fair environment. There were no conditions for the free and fair elections. We, again, as observers, actually saw all those phenomena that are generally decreasing the quality of the elections in Serbia, from photographing the voting ballots behind the voting booths. That was the irregularity that was really highly spread across the entire Belgrade. We saw that at more than 30% of polling stations, and that is something that we haven't seen before as election observers. What does that tell us is that different mechanisms of control voting were in place in Belgrade yesterday to ensure that those people who actually voted, people who that were dragged to the polling station under the control of the ruling party, under the control of the strongest list, were actually having to provide proof that they voted. These elections are just the second half of the game, which started in December. And this first half that was happening in December was really corrupted. Big falls were made, including this central manipulation with the voter registry, the manipulation which was happening within the institutions. It was visible through these organized voter migrations that were happening. After these elections, we didn't have cases of impunity, so no one was held to account. Prosecution did not react. Civil society, including CRTA, we were all slandered through the mainstream media channels by the top government officials that with our assessments, we are kind of destabilizing the order, the constitutional order of the country. We are breaking the constitution, and that we are state enemies of foreign mercenaries and traitors, etc., etc. from that moment until this moment, things have not changed. And basically the elections which we saw yesterday, that we observed at the random and representative sample in Belgrade, random and representative sample of polling stations, did not show that standards for free and fair elections are in place.
Something our listeners will be wondering is, what on earth is a Russian party doing in Serbian elections? Aleksandar, is that malign influence from Russia? Are those Russian spies? Are those Russian residents in Serbia? Or is it something else? Can you enlighten us, please?
Many Russians actually immigrated to Serbia in recent years due to the war in Ukraine, but they are mostly not citizens of Serbia, so they do not have the right to vote. This is not a party set up by real Russians. It is a really fringe party set up in, I believe, 2013 by people who are Serbs. But they managed to register as a Russian minority party because they had some members who were ethnically Russian, but the leader of this party is a Serb. And this party has managed to nominate and submit an electoral list in many municipalities in these elections. And there is a suspicion that they were helped by the ruling party to do so, because as a minority party, an electoral threshold does not apply to them. And with a very small number of votes, they can gain representation in local parliament. And I suspect that some people would be inclined to vote for a Russian party, even though they are not Russian themselves, because of the popularity of Russia in Serbia, especially when they see billboards of this party saying Serbs and Russians are brothers forever and so on. Which was the case, I think, in December in Belgrade. They would be inclined to vote for this party. And as we can see in niche, this can be really useful if this party can gain even a single seat in local parliaments or even national parliament, because that single seat can be crucial for the outcome and for who will form the next administration. And I would just like to mention that this is not the only such party, which can be described variously as either a satellite party or a phantom party, phantom list of Serbian Progressive Party. So there are various suspicions, well-founded, I would say, that the Serbian Progressive Party is using the vast amount of resources it has to actually set up many fake lists and parties and make them run in local elections and national election, so that it can confuse opposition voters and it can take away some small percentage of votes from the opposition, which can, as I say, be crucial in certain situations. Also, they gain allies in electoral commissions this way, because each submitted list gets their representatives in electoral commissions. So this enables SNS to have a majority in an electoral commission with these fake lists and parties. That's one of the many flaws of democracy in Serbia.
Wow, a lot to digest from our discussion. So with all this in mind, and also taking into account the fact that the elections have become a bit of a tradition in Serbia, at least one per year, more or less, let's play a little game. Let's ask the two of you, when do you think the next elections will be? And what do you think will change next time round? Tamara, okay, would you like to go first?
Yeah, and it's really great that you actually provided, get us thinking about the past and how many elections we had so far. We actually calculated that Serbia lost almost 3 years in elections, in this election interregnum, in institutional vacuum since 2012. So over the past 10 to 12 years, elections are always an excellent excuse to say, we can't do these things and we can't move forward, or we can't deliver our promises because, we are in elections and we don't have institutions. But for people who are looking things from the outside, everyone would think, the situation in Serbia is really not stable because we have so many elections and we go to the polls so many times. But in fact, the situation in Serbia is very stable. And while we are all focusing on the elections, one institution is actually finishing the entire work. and it's the institution of the president of Serbia. They're constantly living under some sort of speculations about when the next elections are going to be. And then snap calling of those elections, like the thing which happened, for example, for December elections last year. So in that sense, we are basically going through this time of the uncertainty where the population, where the people are just constantly on this cliffhanger, what is going to happen next, while the president is kind of presenting himself as the only savior of the people while sparking fear, etc., etc. So there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of manipulation, but actually everything is streamlined to achieve basically one goal, which is remaining in power.
So a stable instability overseen by the president. Aleksandar,
yes.
Do you think this stability is going to be shaken next time round? And do you want to speculate when that might be?
Well, Tamara described very well this strategy of using opportunistic early elections by President Vučić. The next official deadline for the presidential election and when his second term expires is April 2027, and the deadline to call the next parliamentary election is December 2027. So both are in 2027, 3 years from now. But I would not bet against earlier elections happening, parliamentary elections, if President Vučić estimates that it's in his own interest to call them, and if opinion polls show him that he will probably win. This is how all snap elections were called since 2012 when his party came to power. So it's really hard to predict. And even if elections do not happen before their regular schedule, he will let the speculation spread, as Tamara was describing, because keeping people on edge are part of his strategy of ruling. I would just like to add that if the opposition, but also European Union and the international community in general do not pay attention to electoral conditions, if there is no political will to do anything about electoral conditions, they will just get worse the next time around. Even in those circumstances, opposition might have a chance to win, as the example of Niš showed us, and the example of Belgrade in December, when the victory was within reach of the opposition, even though the conditions were quite problematic. But for that to happen, opposition will also need to organize itself better. And the state that it is currently in is not very promising in that regard.
Thank you very much, Tamara and Aleksandar, for taking part in Seriously Balkans, and talk to you at the next snap elections.
Seriously Balkans, the BiEPAG Talks.
That was all for this episode. Thank you very much for listening. Until next time.
You've been listening to Seriously Balkans, the BiEPAG Talks. This podcast is produced by the Balkans in Europe Policy Advisory Group, a joint project of the European Fund for the Balkans and the Center for Southeast European Studies of the University of Graz. Find out more about our research, analysis, and advocacy at www.biepag.eu.